The silver moon hung low over the velvet curtains of the prince's chamber, but tonight the heavy silk hangings felt more like a cage than a comfort to young Prince Elian. He had lived his entire life within the high, pale walls of the Sunstone Citadel, a place where the sun always seemed to strike the marble at a sharp, unforgiving angle, and where his future was mapped out in ink on heavy parchment. Elian was a quiet soul, a boy of soft thoughts and silver-gray eyes that often wandered toward the jagged peaks of the obsidian range that tore at the horizon. He felt a strange, humming pull from those distant heights, a calling that whispered of ancient paths and secrets buried under centuries of pine needles. One evening, driven by a restlessness that felt like a heartbeat in his very fingertips, Elian stepped onto his balcony and saw a pair of amber eyes glowing from the edge of the royal gardens, right where the manicured lawns surrendered to the wild, tangled depths of the old forest. It was a wolf, larger than any hound in the kingdom, with fur the color of frozen starlight and a gaze that held the weight of 1,000 winters. The wolf did not snarl or crouch, it simply waited, its breath rising in a rhythmic mist that mirrored the prince's own quickening pulse. Without a word to the guards or a note left on his pillow, Elian found himself descending the stone stairs, his leather boots silent on the grass as he followed the shimmering trail of the beast into the dark embrace of the trees. The transition from the structured world of the court to the living, breathing chaos of the forest was immediate and overwhelming, as the scent of damp earth and crushed mint rose to meet him, and the canopy closed overhead like the ceiling of a vast green cathedral. The wolf moved with a fluid, liquid grace, never looking back to see if the prince followed, yet always pausing just long enough for Elian to catch the glint of its coat through the ferns. As they walked deeper into the heart of the woods, the sounds of the castle faded until there was only the soft crunch of leaves and the distant melodic hoot of a tawny owl. Elian felt a flicker of fear, a natural instinct for a boy raised on tales of predators. But every time his heart began to race, the wolf would slow its pace, turning its head slightly to show a calm, steady eye that seemed to say the path was safe. By the time the first blush of dawn began to bleed through the branches, they had reached a clearing where a spring bubbled from the roots of an ancient oak, the water so clear it looked like liquid diamonds poured over mossy stones. Elian knelt to drink, the cold water waking his senses and washing away the lingering dust of his royal life. And when he looked up, the wolf was sitting a few paces away, watching him with an intelligence that felt almost human. It was then that the prince realized this was not a mere animal, but a guide, a guardian of the threshold between the known world and the mysteries of the wild. The wolf spoke then, not with a voice that vibrated in the air, but with a resonance that echoed directly in Elian's mind, a sound like the low hum of a cello or the wind moving through a canyon. The wolf told him that its name was Kylam, and that they were to embark on a journey not of miles, but of the spirit, traveling across the Great Divide to find the well of reflection before the first snow of the Great Sleep fell. Elian accepted this mission with a solemn nod, feeling a sense of purpose he had never known while studying lineages and laws, and so their long walk began in earnest. The days that followed were a blur of green and gold as they moved through the whispering valleys, where the grass grew tall enough to brush against Elian's waist, and the flowers changed color depending on the mood of the wind. Kylam taught the prince how to read the language of the earth, showing him how a bent twig could tell the story of a passing deer, or how the underside of a leaf could predict an approaching rainstorm. Elian learned to walk with his weight distributed evenly, mimicking the wolf's silent gait, and he found that the more he quieted his own mind, the more the forest began to speak to him in a chorus of rustles, chirps, and sighs. As the season shifted from the vibrant heat of late summer into the mellow, amber glow of autumn, the landscape began to change, rising toward the foothills of the great mountains. The air grew thinner and crisper, tasting of ice and ancient stone, and the trees transitioned from leafy giants to sturdy, resinous pines that smelled of wood smoke and history. Elian's hands, once soft and pale, became calloused and tanned, and his movements lost their hesitant royal stiffness, becoming lean and purposeful. He and Kylam developed a silent shorthand, a bond of shared glances and synchronized breathing that made them feel like two parts of a single entity moving through the world. They spent their nights huddled together for warmth beneath the shelter of rocky overhangs, the wolf's thick fur providing a living hearth for the prince, while Elian shared his meager rations of dried fruit and nuts, though Caleb seemed to draw his sustenance from the very moonlight itself. One evening, as they sat by a small, flicker-free fire made of glow moss, Elian asked the wolf why he had been chosen for this journey, and Caleb replied that the crown was a heavy burden that often blinded those who wore it to the pulse of the living world. To lead a people, the wolf whispered, one must first learn to follow the rhythm of the seasons and understand that every creature, from the smallest beetle to the tallest peak, holds a piece of the truth. Elian pondered this as he watched the embers die down, realizing that his education in the citadel had been an education in walls, while this journey was an education in horizons. They crossed the river of echoes on a bridge made of woven willow roots, the water beneath them singing songs of the mountain's birth. And Elian felt a profound sense of peace wash over him, as if the river were rinsing away his old identity and leaving behind something purer and more resilient. The ascent into the obsidian range was slow and meditative, requiring Elian to focus on every step, every handhold, and every breath, as the path narrowed and the sky opened up into a vast indigo bowl. The silence here was different than the silence of the forest. It was a heavy, sacred quiet that demanded respect, and Elian found himself whispering even when there was no one to hear but the wind. Caleb led the way with unerring precision, finding hidden passes and sheltered ledges where they could rest as the temperature began to drop and the first frosts painted the rocks in delicate, crystalline patterns. The wolf's presence was a constant, stabilizing force, a silver shadow that never wavered even when the path seemed lost or the fog rolled in so thick that Elian could not see his own hands. During these moments of clouded vision, the prince learned to trust his other senses, feeling the vibration of Caleb's paws on the stone and listening for the specific whistle of the wind that indicated an opening in the rocks. One afternoon, as they reached a high plateau that looked out over a sea of clouds, they encountered a hawk circling overhead, its cry a sharp, lonely needle in the stillness, and Elian felt a sudden piercing empathy for all things that lived in the high places. He understood then that power was not about sitting on a golden chair, but about the perspective gained from standing where the earth meets the heavens. The transition into the deeper mountains brought them to the Valley of the Blue Pines, a place where the trees had needles the color of the twilight sky and the ground was carpeted in soft, sapphire-colored needles that muffled every sound. It was here that Elian felt his first true pang of sorrow, realizing that their journey was more than half over, and that the time would eventually come when he would have to return to the world of men. Caleb sensed his melancholy and nudged his hand with a cold, wet nose, reminding him that the present moment was the only home they truly possessed. They continued their climb, the air growing colder and the stars appearing larger and brighter than Elian had ever seen them in the city, sparkling like frost on a dark pond. They walked through the Canyon of Whispers where the wind played the rock formations like a flute, creating haunting, beautiful melodies that seemed to tell the story of the stars themselves. Elian found himself humming along to the mountain song, his voice blending with the wind in a way that felt like a prayer of gratitude. As they neared the summit of the Great Divide, the first snow began to fall, not in a storm, but in gentle swirling flakes that danced in the air like tiny white moths. The world turned into a monochrome masterpiece of gray, white, and silver, and the prince felt as though he were walking through a dream where time had no meaning, and distance was measured only in heartbeats. They reached the Well of Reflection on a night when the moon was at its fullest, a natural basin of obsidian rock filled with water that was so still it acted as a perfect mirror for the cosmos. Caleb stood at the edge of the well and gestured for Elian to look within, and when the prince peered into the dark depths, he did not see the boy who had left the castle weeks ago. Instead, he saw a young man with steady eyes, a weathered face, and a spirit that had been tempered by the elements and softened by the wisdom of a wolf. He saw his future not as a series of laws and edicts, but as a commitment to protect the wild places and the quiet voices of his kingdom. The well reflected not just his face, but his potential, showing him a vision of a world where the citadel and the forest lived in a balanced, respectful harmony. In that moment of profound clarity, Elian felt a deep, abiding love for the wolf who had led him here, a connection that transcended species and language. The journey back was a descent into warmth and color as they retraced their steps while the first heavy snows of winter began to blanket the high peaks behind them. The return trip felt faster, yet every moment was savored, every sunrise celebrated as a gift from the turning earth. They moved through the changing landscapes with a sense of quiet triumph, the prince and the wolf walking side by side as equals in the eyes of the wilderness. As they approached the familiar boundaries of the Sunstone Citadel, the air grew thicker and the sense of humanity began to intrude upon the pristine mountain air, but Elian did not feel the same suffocating dread he had once known. He carried the stillness of the peaks within him now, a portable sanctuary that no amount of royal duty could ever truly disturb. On their last night together, they stayed in the same clearing where they had first shared the spring water, the old oak tree now stripped of its leaves but standing strong against the coming winter. Calum looked at the prince and his voice resonated one last time in Elian's mind, telling him that while their physical path was ending, the bond they had forged would remain as long as the moon rose and the wolves howled in the distance. The wolf promised to be the wind at Elian's back and the shadow in the corner of his eye, a reminder that the wild would always be waiting for him whenever he needed to remember who he truly was. Elian reached out and buried his hands in the thick silver fur of Calum's neck, leaning his forehead against the wolf's powerful shoulder in a gesture of absolute trust and farewell. He felt the warmth of the animal's body and the steady, slow thrum of its heart, a rhythm that felt like the pulse of the world itself. When the sun rose the following morning, Elian was standing alone at the edge of the royal gardens, the dew dampening his boots, and the castle guards just beginning to stir in their towers. The wolf was gone, leaving only a single silver-gray hair caught on the prince's sleeve and a set of fading paw prints in the soft earth. Elian walked back toward the citadel, his head held high, and his heart full of the lessons he had learned under the open sky. He entered the gates not as a runaway boy, but as a prince who had found his soul in the silence of the mountains and the company of a wolf. The marble of the castle seemed less cold now, for he knew that the same earth that supported these stones also supported the pines of the obsidian range and the moss of the whispering valleys. He took up his duties with a new, quiet authority, ruling with a kindness and a wisdom that baffled his advisors but won the hearts of his people. He established laws to protect the ancient forests and the creatures that dwelt within them, ensuring that the wild places would remain wild for generations to come. At night, he would often sit on his balcony, looking out toward the dark silhouette of the mountains, and sometimes when the wind was just right, he would hear a long, soulful howl echoing through the trees. He would smile then, a peaceful, knowing expression, and feel the familiar presence of Calum watching over him from the shadows. The memory of their journey became a source of strength, a wellspring of calm that he could draw upon whenever the pressures of leadership grew too heavy. He remained a friend to the wild, a prince who walked the halls of stone but dreamed of the paths of silver, forever changed by the wolf who had taught him how to see with his heart. And so, as the moon climbed higher into the velvet night, and the world drifted into a deep, restful slumber, Prince Elian would close his eyes and return in his dreams to the starlit trails, the cool mountain air, and the steady guiding presence of his silver-furred brother, finding a peace that passed all understanding and a warmth that lasted through the coldest of winters. The seasons continued to turn, bringing with them the white lace of winter, the tender green of spring, the golden fire of summer, and the rusted beauty of autumn, and with every cycle, Elian grew more attuned to the subtle shifts in the world around him. He noticed the return of the migratory birds with the same focus he applied to his diplomatic ledgers, and he found that the patience he had learned while waiting out a mountain storm served him well in the slow deliberations of the court. His people began to tell stories of the Wolf Prince, the ruler who could talk to the wind and whose eyes held the depth of a forest pool, and his kingdom flourished under a reign characterized by balance and respect for the natural world. He never forgot the weight of Calum's fur against his side, or the way the starlight looked reflected in the well of reflection, and these memories acted as a compass, keeping him true to the path he had discovered in the wild. Even as he aged, the vitality of the mountains seemed to linger in his step, and the clarity of the high air remained in his voice, a testament to the transformative power of a journey taken in the company of a wise spirit. On the quietest nights, when the citadel was wrapped in a blanket of silence, and the only sound was the crackle of a dying fire in his hearth, Elian would feel a soft, cool breeze brush against his cheek, smelling of pine and distant snow, and he knew that Calum was near. It was a connection that time could not weather and distance could not break, a bridge of the spirit that spanned the gap between the world of men and the world of the wild. The prince would let out a long, satisfied breath, his muscles relaxing and his mind drifting toward the edge of sleep, secure in the knowledge that he was never truly alone. The story of the wolf and the prince became a legend whispered by mothers to their children, a tale of trust and transformation that reminded everyone that the greatest journeys are the ones that lead us back to ourselves. And as the final embers of the prince's fire turned to soft gray ash, the image of a silver wolf running across a field of stars was the last thing he saw before the gentle tide of sleep carried him away into a realm of eternal peace and shimmering magic. The prince's life became a tapestry woven with threads of both stone and leaf, a beautiful blend of the civilized and the untamed that brought a unique grace to his every action. He often spent his afternoons walking in the royal gardens, but he allowed them to grow a little more wild, a little more free, encouraging the ivy to climb the walls and the wildflowers to bloom in the cracks of the flagstones. He found that the beauty of the world lay not in its perfection, but in its persistence, in the way a tiny sprout could push through the hardest marble if given enough time and light. This realization made him a more compassionate ruler, one who understood that growth cannot be forced but must be nurtured with patience and care. He often thought back to the Canyon of Whispers and the way the rocks sang their ancient songs, and he realized that every person in his kingdom had a song of their own, a unique voice that deserved to be heard in the grand chorus of the state. He listened more than he spoke, and in that listening, he discovered the true needs of his people, bridging the gap between the high throne and the humble cottage, just as he had bridged the gap between the citadel and the forest. The wisdom of the wolf lived on through him, manifesting as a steady, calm presence that acted as an anchor for the entire realm during times of uncertainty or change. When the first frost of his later years began to touch his own hair with silver, he looked in the mirror and saw not an old man but a seasoned traveler who was ready for whatever horizon lay ahead. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for every mile he had walked and every cold night he had spent under the stars, for those were the moments that had truly defined him. As the years drifted by like fallen leaves on a slow-moving stream, the bond between Elian and the memory of Calum only deepened, becoming a source of quiet joy that radiated from the prince's very soul. He found that he could summon the feeling of the mountain air simply by closing his eyes, and the sound of the river of echoes would often play in the back of his mind during the busiest of days, providing a melodic soundtrack to his duties. He taught his own children to respect the wild, taking them on short journeys to the edge of the forest and showing them how to listen to the language of the trees, passing on the legacy of the wolf to a new generation. He watched with a soft smile as they discovered the magic of a hidden spring or the wonder of a soaring hawk, knowing that the seeds of wisdom he was planting would one day grow into a forest of their own. The kingdom remained a sanctuary of peace, a place where the boundaries between the human and the natural were blurred by a mutual understanding and a shared love for the earth. The Sunstone Citadel itself seemed to change, its marble taking on a warmer, more organic glow, as if it were breathing in rhythm with the surrounding hills. Elian knew that his time as a guardian of this land was a sacred trust, one that he fulfilled with a heart that beat in time with the wild heart of the world. He lived his life with a gentle intensity, savoring the taste of a ripe plum, the feel of the sun on his face, and the sound of the wind in the pines, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary and the magical in the mundane. In the twilight of his life, Prince Elian spent more and more time on his balcony, watching the shadows lengthen over the valley and the stars begin their nightly dance. He felt a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction that his journey had been well traveled and his lessons well learned. He was no longer the restless boy who had followed a wolf into the dark. He was a man who had brought the light of the forest into the heart of the city and the wisdom of the wolf into the minds of men. He knew that the final threshold was approaching, the last crossing into the great sleep that Calum had once spoken of, and he felt no fear, only a calm curiosity and a profound readiness. He imagined Calum waiting for him on the other side of the ridge, his silver coat glowing in the light of an eternal moon, ready to lead him on a new journey across the celestial mountains. This thought brought him a deep, abiding comfort, a warmth that filled his chest and eased the ache in his aging bones. He felt the threads of his life pulling together into a single beautiful pattern, a design that included every step, every breath, and every heartbeat of his long and meaningful existence. He was a part of the stars, a part of the stone, and a part of the wolf, a single drop in the vast, shimmering ocean of being. On a night when the air was exceptionally still and the scent of blooming jasmine filled the gardens below, Elian lay down in his bed and felt the familiar rhythmic mist of a wolf's breath against his hand. He didn't need to open his eyes to know that Caleb was there, a silent shadow of silver and light standing beside him in the quiet room. The wolf's presence was a cool, soothing balm, a final blessing that signaled the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Elian reached out a trembling hand and felt the thick, soft fur he remembered so well, a tactile anchor that grounded him even as his spirit began to drift toward the stars. He heard the low, resonant hum of Caleb's voice in his mind, welcoming him home and promising that the path ahead was one of endless beauty and infinite peace. The prince let out a soft, contented sigh, his heart slowing to match the steady pulse of the wolf, and together they stepped off the balcony of the physical world and into the vast, starlit wilderness of the beyond. There were no more walls, no more crowns, and no more duties. There was only the wind, the moon, and the eternal companionship of two souls who had found their way through the dark. The legend of the wolf and the prince lived on in the hearts of the people, a story of a journey that never truly ends, but simply changes form, reminding all who hear it that the wild is never far away, and that love is the greatest guide of all. And in the silence of the night, if you listen closely to the wind moving through the pines, you can still hear the soft crunch of paws on snow, and the light, rhythmic step of a prince walking beside his brother, forever traveling toward the heart of the light. The world outside continued its slow, graceful dance, the stars circling the pole and the moon waxing and waning in its silver cycle. But within the memory of the journey, time remained suspended in a moment of perfect harmony. The forests remained deep and green, the mountains stayed tall and proud, and the rivers continued to sing their ancient songs of the earth's beginning. The legacy of Elian and Caleb was carved into the very landscape, in the way the light fell through the trees and the way the snow settled on the high peaks. It was a story written in the language of the wild, a narrative of trust that transcended the spoken word, and an emotional connection that bridged the gap between the mundane and the miraculous. As the listeners of this tale drift further into their own dreams, they carry with them the image of the silver wolf and the steady prince, a vision of peace that guides them through the quiet hours of the night. The warmth of the journey enfolds them like a soft blanket, and the rhythm of the story becomes the rhythm of their own breathing, slow and deep and calm. There is a sense of being protected, of being guided by a wisdom that is as old as the hills and as gentle as a summer breeze. The journey of the wolf and the prince is a reminder that we are all travelers on a path of discovery, and that with a little trust and a lot of heart, we can find our way through any forest and over any mountain. The night is a vast, friendly expanse, a place of rest and renewal where the spirit can roam free alongside the silver shadows of the past. Sleep comes easily now, a natural descent into a world of shimmering pines and obsidian wells, where the only duty is to rest and the only goal is to dream. The silver wolf watches over the slumbering world, a guardian of the threshold who ensures that every soul finds its way to the well of reflection and back again. The prince sleeps in the hearts of those who dream of a better, kinder world, a world where the citadel and the forest are one. And so, the story closes its eyes and breathes a final, soft word of peace, leaving the listener in the tender embrace of a night that is both mysterious and profoundly home.